Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm just going to give it a few moments while people trickle in. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Um, Excited to see so many people registering for this webinar.
Oh, I see. It shows in the bottom.
Yeah, and I think I'll maybe just give it one more moment. It looks like attendance is kind of leveling off, so we might as well get started. So, welcome to How a Conservator Looks at Works on Paper. My name is Greg Stewart. I'm the Education Program Manager at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, or CCAHA, as they say, and I use they and he pronouns. We like to, for visual description, for accessibility's sake, just describe ourselves. So, I'm a white person with glasses, and I have a green shirt with a yellow button down underneath, and there is a yellow wall and some doors in my background here. Um, so just a bit more about today's program. We're delighted to have Nancy Ash, former senior conservator of works on paper at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and current CCAHA board member, here today for a presentation on close-looking skills for appreciating works on paper. In this talk, she'll provide you with new ways of looking at art, how to describe what you're seeing, and how to consider the context of the artist's choice of materials and techniques. And these visual literacy skills can be used broadly, regardless of your career or level. So before we get to our speaker's presentation, just some Zoom housekeeping. You're in Zoom webinar, which means that your video and audio are turned off, but you can ask questions or make comments to us in the chat. This program is auto closed captioned in English, and you can turn on subtitles with the little CC button in the Zoom toolbar. So the format today will have a presentation from our speaker followed by Q&A with you, but please feel free to ask questions as they come up anytime during the program, and I'll just be kind of taking note of them and I can read them off verbally when it comes time for Q&A. The program is being recorded, and we'll send a recording as well as the PowerPoint in a follow-up email. So I just want to take a moment and say this program was previously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, which allowed us to provide high-quality educational programs in fulfillment of our mission. Please consider a donation to CCAHA or an institutional membership, if that applies to you, to help us keep our webinars free of cost to all. Every little bit helps. And on that note, just a quick note about the organization I work for, CCAHA. We are a regional conservation lab and preservation services facility. We're based here in Philadelphia, but we work with organizations and clients all across the country. Our conservators treat paper-based objects like books, photographs, documents, artwork on paper, and more. And our preservation services staff work in the field providing educational programs like this one and helping institutions plan for the future of their collections. The center also offers a wide range of digitization services, as well as fundraising assistance, housing and framing, and more. And you can learn more about us and what we do at our website, ccaha.org. So, a bit more about our speaker today. Nancy Ash, as I mentioned, worked at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and she was there from 1991 to 2020, and worked previously here at CCHA, as well as the National Gallery of Art and the Library of Congress. She served on the American Institute for Conservation, or AIC's, committee that produced the 1994 Code of Ethics and Guidelines for Practice, was a founding member of the Paper Conservation Catalog in 1984, and founding co-chair of the AIC Book and Paper Discussion Group. She is interested in and has published on artist materials and techniques and on digital documentation of conservation records. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy, who's going to do the visual description for herself and then get it started on the talk.
Hi, I'm Nancy Ash. I am a white woman with white hair and glasses, green shirt, and there's a wooden staircase behind me. And now I can begin, right? Yes. All right. So for the past 6 years, with my colleagues in the Paper Conservation Lab at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, I've been teaching a seminar to Penn undergraduates on how to look at works of art and paper. And the goal is to teach them techniques that allow them to look critically at art in ways that they hadn't previously. And then by using these new approaches, it helps them understand the choices that artists make in terms of the materials and techniques they use. So, as conservators, we're trained to examine and understand the physical object, the real thing. So, one contribution we can make is to help others learn how to do this and to understand why it's a valuable skill to have. The approach is called object-based study. It's about looking at the actual art object as compared to studying it in a book or looking at it online. And we teach how to use close observation to develop a kind of visual literacy. So basically, it's teaching connoisseurship skills that have to do with recognizing subtle inherent qualities in a work of art. And I have images that my colleagues and I have taken over the years. And so I'm kind of inviting you into the class to give you some insight into the mind of the artist so that when you go to a museum, you can appreciate the art not only for its compelling image, but maybe with some insight into the creative process. So here's my first slide. So what we teach the students are new ways to look at art, how to describe what they're seeing, and then to consider the context, which is the history of the art materials and why the artist chose them. And so in each class, what we do is we bring works of art from drawing and print storage. Most of these pieces aren't framed, so they have unusual access to them. And then we'll begin each session by introducing the topic. Students pair up to examine the works that we have on display, and then we all get together to discuss what we've seen. So obviously I can't do that here online, but I'll use images from the class to introduce you to the approach. Um, by the way, we're in the class, we're dealing with the same range of materials that are treated at the Conservation Center at CCAHA, art and paper. So it's drawings, watercolors, pastels, collage, prints, books. And so I'm going to begin with some straightforward tools and approaches we use for looking, and then I'll share examples of what we can observe in terms of the materials and techniques. The tools are illumination and magnification. Illumination is normal light. Basically, that's general room light or the light that you would see in an exhibition. Raking light is the light positioned at an acute angle to the surface of the work of art, and it reveals a lot about the topography. Transmitted light is obvious, light passing through the art from behind. So if the piece is thin enough, we can gather information that way. For magnification, it can be as simple as a head loupe or a magnifying glass, but very often we will examine works and even treat works while viewing through a low power microscope. So we begin our examination by standing back as you would in a museum to get a feel for the whole piece. And then we come in close to learn more, first using that normal light, um, and then we use more directed light. So I'm starting with raking light. Um, so raking light, again, is light that is shining across the surface at a very sharp angle, and it's a really powerful tool. And we use it all the time because it reveals the subtle topography of a work of art, the surface texture of the paper, and the design materials. And so from this, we can gain all sorts of information about the manufacture and the condition. So what I'm showing you is a Japanese Edo period print by Kitagawa Utamaro. And it has, and I think you can see this, it has a printed pink mica background. And raking light reveals the sheen of the mica. And you can see that at center where the piece is on an easel. And then with magnification to the right of that, you can also see the subtle scratch losses in this very delicate material. And then one more detail on the right, on the far right, their raking light shows the intricate embossing from the relief printing blocks. This is typical of many Japanese prints, which are color relief prints that use several different carved blocks to make the image. Okay, this is another raking light shot. Um, on the right, you see a detail from this watercolor by John Singer Sargent. And here, raking light reveals the textured surface of the watercolor paper. Most watercolor papers are, are significantly textured, but this particular texture I've seen in many Sargents. And you can also see by raking light the raised impasto of the thick white opaque watercolor on the shirt. And this sort of impasto is very delicate. And so seeing this alerts us to the extra care that needs to be taken in handling and in conservation treatment. And it might not otherwise be obvious. One more raking light shot. This is a complex print by Stanley William Hayter. It's an intaglio print, and in the simplest terms, that means that the artist created recessed lines in a metal plate. Ink is then worked into those lines, and when the dampened paper is placed against the plate and rolled through a press under a lot of pressure, the ink transfers to the paper surface to create the image. So this pressure also affects the damp paper in several ways, and you can see that at center and in the detail at right. Um, One, the edge of the plate presses into the paper, creates a pronounced indentation called the plate mark, but it also stretches the damp paper inside the plate area so that when the paper dries, that extra stretch paper sometimes has nowhere to go. And then these undulations form inside the plate. And you can also see how smooth the papers become where it was subjected to the pressure of the metal plate. So this brings us to an important point. These kinds of distortions and alterations that occur during a print's manufacture or any works at manufacture are inherent to the piece. They're distinguishing features of the print. They're particularly pronounced in this Hayter. And they're integral to the work and so we want to protect them and preserve them during handling or framing or any conservation treatment. We don't want to flatten them. Okay, now another valuable form of illumination is transmitted light. If the paper is thin enough, we can use transmitted light to reveal information about how the paper was made and sometimes information about the condition and the artist's techniques. And this is always one of my favorite examples. It's a 16th century Italian study drawing, and it was used to transfer the image to another surface. And it's a drawing that was never meant to last, and it's really amazing that it did and that we have it. So on the left, you're seeing it in normal light, and you can see the drawing materials, the brown ink, touches of white chalk, and you can also see all sorts of staining and wear from age. But what you probably don't suspect is what's revealed when we place this drawing over a transmitted light source, a light box. Oops. Um, it's been pricked for transfer. So that's a technique that involves pricking holes along the lines of a study drawing and then dusting charcoal or dry pigment through the holes onto an underlying sheet so the design is transferred. And in this case, you don't see any dusting on the front. It was placed face down, and there are traces of a red chalk that had been used to, it's called pouncing when you put the dry material through the pinprick holes. Another thing that the raking light reveals is how crudely made this sheet is, and you can see all these little clumps of paper fiber. So it's essentially a roughly made sort of paper that was used for this supposedly ephemeral drawing. So now I'm showing you this Mary Cassatt print for contrast, again, here in transmitted light. And what you see is the pattern of a traditional handmade paper, yes, handmade laid paper. Um, and by the way, this particular sheet is from an old ledger, and you can't see it, but there are pinprick holes from sewing along the left edge. Um, and she's left an old brown ink inscription at the top right. So it was fairly common for Cassatt to choose old used papers like this, and we can only speculate, but that she did it to add a subtle richness to her impressions. Okay, now magnification. So we might just use a simple head loupe or magnifying glass, but often we examine and treat the art while we're looking through this low-powered microscope. And we can combine that with normal raking and transmitted light. So what I'm showing here, there's a camera mounted on the microscope. So we use that to capture and store images on the computer. And that's a lot of those photos that I'm showing you today. And we can also project the image onto a much larger screen for class discussion. That's my brief overview of ways of looking. And now I'll show you how we use these tools to study materials and techniques. So the materials we study are the paper support and the wet and dry drawing materials and how they're applied, and also a range of print processes. And throughout the course, we remind the students to think about the defining characteristics of different materials, basically what they look like, and how these characteristics influence the artist's choice and how they affect the appearance of the completed work of art. So we begin with the support, the paper. On the left, you see a laid paper mold. It's the sort that was used pretty exclusively in the West from the 14th through mid-18th centuries. Um, in the center is a transmitted light shot of paper that was cast on such a mold, and it shows characteristic widely spaced chain lines and narrowly spaced laid lines. And on the far right is a wove paper, which was introduced, wove paper was introduced in the mid 18th century when they needed a smoother surface for book printing. And I think you can see by transmitted light the more even cloth-like fiber, even cloth-like fiber distribution. That is paper. Now I'm on to drawing materials. Um, so the media, the design materials, we begin the class with drawing materials, and they're divided into wet and dry. And this example that I'm showing is dry drawing materials, black dry drawing materials, and I've chosen charcoal and graphite. And here you see them used in two highly finished drawings. On the left, in David Bomberg's charcoal drawing, you can see how diffuse this medium is, and also, I think, how easily he has lifted or swiped away charcoal to create highlights at center left, for example. And just compare that to the Via Kelman's meticulous, refined graphite drawing of the ocean on the right. And she's famous for these drawings. So now we're going to look deeper into these two materials, charcoal and graphite. So these are photomicrographs of them. To the unaided eye, if you're looking at charcoal and graphite in a drawing, they They can appear very similar and they can both be used for similar purposes, but they also have distinctive qualities that make them suitable for very different uses, as you saw in the Bomberg and the Kellman's drawings. So both of them are forms of carbon. Charcoal has been used since antiquity, and it's made by heating twigs in an airtight chamber. And this makes a stick of charcoal very brittle. So when it's applied to paper, it splinters and the particles scatter. So on the left, you can see I think you can see the dusting and the sparkle of tiny fractured particles. And these kind of soft, dusty lines make it especially useful for rapid sketches and underdrawings, but also Bomberg chose it for that powerful image. Now on the right is graphite is a mined material, and we usually see it in pencil form. And its versatility makes it suitable for spontaneous sketches and underdrawings, but also for highly finished works like the Kellmans. So microscopically, graphite is formed in flat sheets, and that's why it's shiny. And also used as a lubricant that goes with that. Um, so when you view it with raking light, on the right, you can see that distinct dark gray metallic sheen. And also, you can see the indentation um, by the pencil point. So that's another way we would study how it's delivered. Okay, but of course, an artist often uses wet and dry media in combination. This is a Rubens drawing, and here the underdrawing is black chalk, and he's laid out the composition with the chalk. But what I think is interesting are the details at center, because he leaves the chalk visible even as he's adjusting the design with the washes and the pen and ink. So the chalk doesn't just simply read as an underdrawing, it contributes visually to the final image. And one more of combining the wet and dry drawing materials because I love this exquisite William Blake drawing. Again, he's combined wet and dry materials um, and high magnification. Actually, all three of these images are high magnification, but high magnification allows you to really observe the interplay of the ink, the touches of watercolor in the lips and cheeks, and also the prominent role that graphite plays in the composition in the image. So in the class, from drawing materials, we move on to prints, and I'm just going to touch on them very briefly. Um, a first step in identifying prints is observing how that ink is transferred from the ink surface or the matrix to the paper. And I chose the two that I'm showing here because PMA has some really excellent examples of a matrix and then the print that was the images that were printed from them. So on the left is a planographic technique. It's a Diego Rivera lithograph, and the lithographic stone is positioned below it. Um, and in a planographic technique, in a lithograph, the printed image lies directly on the surface of the stone. The stone's been chemically treated to repel or to hold the ink. So this image is really pretty flat when you view it with raking light. And by contrast, on the right, the Rufino Tamayo woodcut, a woodcut is a relief print. And so that means that the non-image parts of the woodblock are cut away. Ink is rolled over the remaining raised surfaces of the block, and the image is printed from those raised surfaces. And this process often creates distinctive embossing of the paper. So that's a characteristic we look for. And I glimpsed it before in the detail that I showed of the Utamaro woodcut. And finally, here's an etching by Charles Marion. It's an intaglio print. I showed you the Hayter and the Cassatt before. Both of those were intaglio prints. Um, the matrix would be the metal plate with the ink worked into the recessed lines of the design. So when the ink is pulled from the what pull from I'm sorry, when the ink is pulled from those lines onto the paper when it goes through the press, right? The ink sits as little mounds on the paper surface, and that is particularly evident in a pristine print like this. And I think that you can see that really clearly in the photomicrograph in the center. And really, that's what I have to tell you today, but I'm happy to answer questions. I've shown you some very basic tools and approaches that conservators use and what we gain from this close examination. I hope this brief introduction gives you a greater appreciation of what we do and also what you can gain with close looking. And I thank all my colleagues who've produced the images with me that I've shown today.
Thank you so much, Nancy. So I just want to say I was so excited when you came to us with this idea for this talk. I come from a museum education background, and we always talk about close looking and what we do, but I think it's really great to sort of um, compare how close looking can be used in so many different ways to understand the artist's media. So I'm so grateful that you could be here today to do that with us. Just echoing what Nancy said, we can definitely take plenty of questions from the audience. And I see that we already have, well, first of all, Leslie Miller says Hayter was my printmaking teacher. That's amazing. I love that. And also is pointing out, I didn't know the lithographic stones were treated with something. I thought it was just the oil-based ink, which did everything to print. What is used, I think maybe in terms of those chemical processes.
I I am not the person to ask about lithographic processes, so I don't know the intricacies of the process. I mean, there is oil-based print, but then the oil is removed and the surface is sensitized. But I was so afraid someone's going to ask me about how the lithograph was done. Yes. Okay.
Well, and I think, I mean, my understanding too, yeah, it's basically that principle of oil and water, but I think
Yes.
there's so many
Yes.
different chemical treatments that have been used over the years. I think it's
Yeah.
it's not always um a
There might be a conservator here who wants to answer that, but yeah.
um oh, okay. So Ben is also asking about using techniques for authentication and appraisal, if that is a potential use.
So when something comes into the museum, especially something that is, valuable, we will examine it in great detail. And there's some obvious tells, whether the paper is correct or the paper isn't correct. What is often more interesting is that Old Master prints, this is what's interesting to me, and I found these the most interesting. Um, Old Master prints through the years, because of their value, because they've passed through so many hands, often have very subtle retouching. And it's an interesting process to sit with the microscope and to sit with the print. And as you're studying it, things become more and more evident to you. And simple retouching, lines that have been abraded, that doesn't necessarily devalue the print, but sometimes you'll find something that has extensive reworking. And it's interesting. It's just a puzzle, to get involved with. But your eye adapts, even though you've done this many times, as you're sitting with this over an hour or more. you start to see things.
Nice. Our next question is, have you used microscopy, excuse me, for art analysis? Um,
So, yeah,
what would
go.
be the reason to look at at that closely at an artwork?
So then you're really studying materials at a a much more microscopic level, and you're really analyzing the materials and the materials, the paper or the pigments or the inks. Um, so the conservators don't do that, or the paper conservators don't do that, but the scientists at the museum do that. So that's a different, I'm showing you what you can do, and that's a much deeper kind of analysis. And we use it for paper, but we use it for paper, but I think other disciplines may use it more than we do. Yeah,
Mhm. Our next question is, would you be willing to talk more about laid paper and how it is made?
sure.
Um, can laid paper be treated by a conservator to remove matte burn discoloration?
Okay, first we'll talk about laid paper. We'll talk about how any paper is made. So any handmade paper is made. So paper fiber is suspended in a bath and it's agitated, and that mold I showed you is together is dipped into the bath, pulled up in such a way that the paper fibers are deposited on the surface of the screen. The water drains out from below, and what you see in the finish, and it's turned, and after the water's out, you turn it onto a felt and let it dry. But what you see is that there are fewer fibers where their wires are than the spaces in between. So what you're seeing are thick, thin areas, and the same thing with the watermark. Um, Less pulp is deposited over the watermark wires. So those are thinner areas, and so then you can read them um, with raking light. I mean, sorry, with transmitted light, right? You want to ask about matte burns. I don't know if everybody knows a matte burn. A matte burn is generally when an acidic matte was um, placed over a print and it was in contact for a long time. And it can be a disfiguring brown line around the perimeter. Um, and there are various ways to treat it. Sometimes we leave it. Sometimes by slightly over, if we don't want to get into a complete treatment, sometimes by slightly over matting, you're not intruding on the image and we don't find it so disturbing. But there are various aqueous ways that conservators will use to remove or reduce the matte line. It could just be um, conditioned water, but sometimes we will use bleaches and rinse them out. But it's generally sometimes we used to do it locally. I think now, if the work of art, if it's acceptable to do it for that work of art, we may do an overall bath of sorts. Yeah. But it's complex. There's a lot of decision making in the process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do conservators ever use carbon dating on works?
I'm speaking paper conservators here. So yes, carbon dating is used on works, particularly wooden works and objects. In in paper conservation, I think that is rare. But yes, I mean carbon dating is used. You know.
Yeah, and this is a very cursory understanding of carbon
Yeah,
dating I have, but it generally has a pretty long tail before it gets accurate, right? So it'd have to be
it
paper
had.
that's quite old, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, of course, there is paper going back thousands of years. Um, if we look at early paper in China and things like that. So I could see how uh, that could be used in that scenario. How would you apply these techniques to works on paper that are more archival, photo collections, architectural drawings? Would you
So
use
you
some of
would
the
use,
same
you would really
techniques?
use the same techniques. I mean, these are, and they're applicable to non-works of art and paper, of course, but paper is so flat, you tend to regard it as completely flat, right? And these techniques, particularly the raking light, um, it shows you a lot that's going on and that it's not just a flat piece of paper and it kind of animates what you're looking at. You have a different appreciation for that service. And it's the same for any work of art and paper. And it will also show um, uneven gloss, maybe in a photograph that might be particularly useful. And really, it's the same for archival pieces. Yeah.
So Nancy, you're right. We have Jessica, who is our head of paper conservation here at
Oh, good.
CCAHA, was is helpful in fielding that question about the lithograph. And just so everybody sees that, an acid mixture in gum arabic is applied to the stone and fixes the greasy media to the stone. The greasy area accepts the ink, and the other areas absorb water and repel ink. So thank you for that assist, Jessica.
Good.
We're
I knew
glad
we
you're on the
had
call
this.
with us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we also have a question here about some main differences between conserving Western versus East Asian paper.
So the first papers we know are, I mean, not talking about papyrus, which is really a sheet form that is in the same family, right? But the first papers we know are Chinese papers, and then a lot of papers developing in the East. And one, they begin with different fibers. And I know Japanese papers the most, and different forms of bast fibers, and their screens are different screens. They're flexible screens. Um, you could ask me more. I mean, it's a different set of fibers, different sorts of screens. Um, Rarely are there watermarks, only in some contemporary Asian papers. What else would you like to know? I mean, I don't want to go on and on, but
Well, I'll wait for if they have any additional questions for you. But in the meantime, do you know some conservation techniques that are used for materials that were not intended to last? I'm thinking about shadow puppets. I'm wondering if you've ever worked with anything like that.
so I haven't worked with a shadow puppet, but it's always interesting to decide how you're going to approach something that wasn't intended to last. I think generally, and again, there's so many issues. It's hard to generalize, but generally, I think we would try to stabilize it as it is, and that could take a whole range of meanings. Reinforcing it, mending it. I think we would do that. Um, when you said things that are not meant to last, my I jump immediately to contemporary works of art where the artists are really thinking of these things as ephemeral. And if the artist is living, you have to consult with the artist. Do you own it now, or are you responsible to doing what they want you to do with it? How do you preserve it? And is that a dialogue that you engage in? So that, I mean, there's so many different ways we could go on that question, right?
Yeah. Um, so we have a just sorry, there's a couple more questions coming in. Leslie Miller says, I use Kozo paper. I know how it's made, but is a paper like Kozo made from mulberry bushes considered archival? What exactly? Aha, we get the
So
question all the
in
time about
paper,
archival. But yes, go ahead.
you get it all the time, right? Well,
Yeah.
a good quality Kozo paper, we use it all the time in paper conservation because it is so pure, it is so strong, it's long fibered. So our mending, our liming is very often with a Japanese Kozo paper that I think that's the most frequently used Japanese or Asian paper that paper conservators use. Yeah.
And just a quick note about that term archival, because we get that
Yeah.
question broadly about whether things are archival or not. I what we typically advise people is that's often kind of a marketing term. So if you're looking to purchase supplies, don't necessarily go with just that. You might look for things depending on what you're doing, and there's so many different types of things you might do, but you might think about looking more for if it's acid-free and when it was manufactured, or if it's lignin-free, which is a fibrous pulp in byproduct of paper making that deteriorates over time. So you want to look for things that are lignin-free, acid-free. Those are going to be better for the safety of your objects if you're looking for folders or interleaving or things like that. But yeah, Kozu paper is definitely as you said, it's great paper for conservators. It's more expensive than some other stuff, but it absolutely is very durable. Um, so this is the follow-up question from Atusa, if I'm saying your name correctly. I heard that certain conservation chemicals, materials can't be used on Japanese washi paper. Do paper conservators working in the West import special conservation materials required for Japanese paper from Japan, or require separate training in Japan to learn special techniques for Japanese paper?
So I would flip that around a little bit. It's not so much that the chemicals and treat approaches we use are good for any kind of paper. This we only use stable adhesives, stabilized water, but it's more that the form, this might be what you're asking, that the forms that certain Asian works take, like hanging scrolls or hand scrolls or folding screens, those are very specific forms, and you need specialized training to deal with those structures. And we in the West, we will do, even if we don't have that very specific training, we'll do small treatments on them, and we're capable of doing that. And really, the same materials are work, but it's the larger structure that is it's a very specialized approach.
Thank you. Our next question is for folks that work on the housing and preservation side, and Nancy, maybe you'll have some insights into this too.
Maybe
When it
you will.
comes,
Yeah,
maybe we'll see. When it comes to works that have relief marks and indentations that are part of the work that need to be preserved,
yeah.
do we need to take any special storage care, especially if they are stored in flat files?
So you do. And there's various ways I can think about that. You want to protect those. They can be in folders, but without, you have to think about how much weight is over them. Um, and how delicate, you're going to assess them on an individual basis. How delicate are those raised portions of the image? Even that opaque watercolor in the Sargent, you don't want anything pressing on that surface because it will damage that surface. The prints I've showed you, you know, there can be some overlying weight, but when you're matting these things, you want to mat them in a way that does protect those altered surfaces. There's again, these are very broad questions. Yeah, so I think the impressions and the prints. Oh, yeah, I'll stop there because I'm going to go on. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think I mean, it's we kind of joke at the center sometimes that our answer to everything is it depends.
I mean, these are huge questions, right?
Yeah. Um, but yes, it sounds like yeah, the it case by case basis they might need separate care. Um, I maybe I can do a last call for any questions. I think we're at the end of our questions here in the chat. I have a quick question for you, Nancy. It's very practical. I noticed, I think it was on the slide when you were showing students using raking light with works in the study collection or with the study room. Um, you they were using a certain kind of handheld light to see to look at the work with raking light. I'm really
Right.
curious what what type of light you were using
It
to,
is not a specialized light. We wouldn't let you go into the it's a normal flashlight. We wouldn't let you go
gotcha.
into the museum and shine your flashlight on the works of art to pick out this raking, these raking characteristics. Um, but we do it in a limited way here, and we do it for our examinations. I will say that though on an exhibition, if you stand to the side of a work and you want to pick up some of this information, you will get, you'll experience sort of a rake over the surface that will tell you something about its topography.
Okay. Yeah, the only reason I'm asking is because I mean, we in our at CCHA in our lab, we have a photo studio where we can set up tripods and have
Right, right.
raking light. But if I'm always looking for cost-effective ways that people who might not have their own photo studio
Yeah,
at their
yeah.
institution can still take advantage of
I
some.
mean, there are flashlights that we have, but yeah, this is not one of them, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Um, and we have maybe I'll just ha we have one last question here. Do you ever find damage that needs to be addressed when receiving or transporting exhibits? And actually, this will be a two-part question because Ben is also asking, do you recommend any affordable light boxes?
Okay, I don't recommend. I don't have light boxes that I recommend. Although, online now you can buy. I'm not speaking to the quality of the light, but a flexible light sheet,
Mm,
and I use that at home, and they're really inexpensive. Just if you want to get some transmitted light information. Um, but do I ever find so when you have a traveling exhibition, so you have works of art coming into your museum or leaving your museum, um, we do a condition report. So if someone asks, I think this is the question, if someone asks to borrow a work of art for an exhibition, first it will be approved or tentatively approved by the curator, and then the conservators will look at it, and we'll look at it one just to see, whether it's stable for loan in general and whether it needs any treatment before it can go on loan, that treatment that would make it acceptable for loan. And the same thing is true of works that come into the museum for an exhibition. They usually come with a condition report, and the conservators will examine that work of art to see if they concur, to see if any damage has occurred in travel, um, and what has to be done with it. Um, I think that's the answer. Yeah. Is that the
nice,
answer?
thank
Right.
you.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. And just another follow-up from Jessica in the comments, Jessica, our head of paper conservation here. We use flexible light sheets at CCHA. Look for LED light sources. They won't have any UV light in their spectrum. So that's good advice to look for that. Again, as you're shopping for these materials, UV can be damaging to artworks over a long period of time, and LED is generally going to be safer. So thank you for that, Jessica. And I think at this point, I just want to thank you, Nancy. We're already getting such lovely comments, people thanking you and saying this was very helpful. And I also wanted to thank Camilla Dawson, who is behind the scenes helping us with all of the tech for today's program. And thanks for everybody for showing up today and for bringing your questions. And if you are considering a donation, we really appreciate that. Just a note that our next webinar will be succession planning for cultural institutions. What's next? And that will be on January 28th at noon. So we hope to see you there. And when this program ends, a little survey will pop up after the window closes, and we just kindly ask that you fill that out to let us know how you're doing. So thanks again.